In this video, we'll be taking a tour of the visual system. We'll follow visual information on its journey from light waves in the outside world to electrical signals transduced by your eyes, and finally, visual perception constructed by your brain. In particular, your textbook and a lot of YouTube videos explaining how vision works tend to focus on the eyes. While you obviously need your eyes to see, your eyes alone don't make vision happen. As a result, in this video, we're going to focus a little bit more on the brain, which really does so much of the work that's necessary for you to be able to see. Visual information starts as light waves. Some of these light waves enter your eyes, where receptor cells arranged along the retina, the back surface of the eye, send signals to neurons based on the amount and the type of light that hits them. These receptor cells aren't neurons, but they do communicate with neurons. Receptor cells transduce light information into neural information. Transduction is the process of turning information in one form, in this case light waves, into another form, neural firing. These neural signals then get transmitted to the neurons bundled together in your optic nerves, which carry action potentials from your eyes to your brain. Importantly, receptor cells are connected to neurons based on their location in the retina. That means that the neural signals about what light is hitting your eyes are not all jumbled up together, but can be reconstructed as a sort of 2D image resembling what's being projected on your retina. The visual field that's projected onto your retina is everything you can see. We can orient within the visual field using directional terms, like the upper left or the lower right visual field. Keep in mind that the visual field is always relative to your eyes, not to the outside world. The location of things in your visual field depends entirely on where your eyes are pointed. The first stop in the brain for visual information coming in through the optic nerves is the thalamus, a subcortical structure inside of the cerebral cortex. Remember, your thalamus generally functions as the relay station that organizes sensory information coming in from sensory organs, like your eyes in this case, before sending it to the cerebral cortex. After visual information is cleaned up by the thalamus, it gets sent to your primary visual cortex in your occipital lobe. The primary visual cortex, or area V1, is in a specific sulcus in the occipital lobe called the calcarine sulcus. At this stage of visual processing, your visual cortex doesn't yet see a complete visual picture. So what does area V1 see? V1 responds most strongly to sharp lines. Some neurons in V1 respond to vertical lines. Some respond to horizontal lines. And some respond to lines somewhere in the middle. Combine all those neurons together, and anytime you show something with sharp lines somewhere and in some orientation, some neurons in V1 will fire strongly. Remember that the electrical signals coming into V1 are still organized according to where the signals came from on the retina. Not only do neurons in V1 respond to lines of specific orientations, but they also respond to lines of specific orientations in specific areas of the visual field. Some neurons might respond only to these lines shown here, and other neurons might respond to lines of the same orientation, but shown here instead. And these neurons are not arranged randomly either. If you were to unfold the cortex of V1, the preferred areas of the neurons are arranged as if a map of the visual field was projected onto the unfolded cortex. This is called retinotopic organization, or a retina map. If you were looking at a big circle, a circle-shaped arrangement of neurons would fire in V1. If you were looking at a big heart, a heart-shaped arrangement of neurons would fire in V1. The neurons fire like a map of the retina. However, there's one peculiar thing about this map. The V1 neuron map is flipped right to left and upside down relative to our actual visual field. This happens because the image on the retina itself is flipped. When light enters our eyes through our pupils and gets focused by our lenses, physics happens and the light waves are flipped both ways when they get projected on the retina. This double flipped image then gets sent as is to the brain, which eventually flips the signal left to right and right side up again, so that we perceive the world as it's really oriented. Now's a great time to remember that this all happens in both hemispheres of the brain. Combined, left and right V1 make a map of our entire visual field, but left V1 only maps the right half, and right V1 only maps the left half. This doesn't mean that our left eye only sends signals to the right hemisphere, and that our right eye only sends signals to the left hemisphere. If we look at the optic nerves as they go from the eyes to the thalamus and then to the occipital lobe, we see that the nerves split in two at the optic chiasm, the crossover point of the optic nerves. The term chiasm comes from chi, the Greek letter X, for the shape of the crossover. The nerves coming from the left half of both retinas go to the left hemisphere of the brain, and the nerves coming from the right half of both retinas go to the right hemisphere. And because the image on the retina is flipped right to left and upside down, the right visual field is projected on the left half of both retinas, and vice versa with the left visual field. At the optic chiasm, information is sorted by visual field location, not by eyeball source, so your left hemisphere receives input from the left half of both eyes, and your right hemisphere receives input from the right half of both eyes. Our hemispheres then work together for us to see the whole visual field. Almost all of the brain regions we're showing in this video appear roughly symmetrically on both hemispheres. But for this video, though, we're highlighting brain regions on just one hemisphere because it's easier to see. As the first, or earliest, visual region in the cerebral cortex, V1 is incredibly important. However, sharp lines aren't all that we see. We see shapes and colors and motion, and we see all of those things put together as objects and people. As neural signals exit V1 and pass on to other visual regions, those other regions compute information about other visual features. After V1, signals go to V2, then V3, then V4. These regions appear to compute information about shape and color, with each region's computations getting a little more complicated than the one before. V4 is especially important for color perception. Visual information continues in the anterior direction through the occipital cortex to regions like MT, which responds to motion. Altogether, these regions take up pretty much the entire occipital lobe. That's right, one entire lobe of the brain is dedicated to a single sense. For most humans, vision is by far the most important sense we use to understand the outside world, and that's reflected in how much cortical real estate vision takes up. And it's not just the occipital lobe. Other lobes have visual regions too. Vision is by far the biggest sense in the brain. At this point, neural signals for vision split up and travel along two different paths. One path goes along the ventral surface of the cerebral cortex and generally computes information about objects, or what we see. The other path goes along the dorsal surface of the cerebral cortex and computes information about spatial location, or where we see things. Along the ventral, or what pathway, neural signals travel out of the occipital lobe onto the ventral, or inferior surface of the temporal lobe. On the ventral temporal cortex, there are highly specialized regions that respond to complex shapes like words, objects, faces, non-face body parts, and full visual scenes like houses or pictures of mountains, beaches, and such. These all give us information about what, and sometimes who, we are looking at. Along the dorsal, or where, pathway, neural signals travel in the superior direction onto the parietal lobe. Visual regions on the dorsal parietal cortex tend to respond to specific spatial locations in the visual field. This gives us information about the arrangement of objects in our vision. These sections of the parietal cortex also help support our ability to pay attention to specific areas of the visual field, especially regions on the periphery of our visual field that we aren't looking directly at. For example, imagine you were sitting at a cafe working on your laptop while waiting to meet a friend. You might pay attention to the door of the cafe, up and to the left of you, out of the corner of your eye, so you can quickly wave your friend over to your table when they arrive. The area of your dorsal parietal cortex, responding to the upper left portion of your visual field, would show increased brain activity while you were paying attention to the door in the corner of your vision, even while you're looking directly at your laptop. And that concludes our tour of the visual system. We've followed visual signals from the eye to the thalamus and far out into multiple lobes of the cerebral cortex. I hope you take away from this how complex visual processing can be and how much the brain contributes to vision. The eyes are great, but the next time you're looking closely at something, I hope you'll give your brain some love too.